Every single morning, millions of individuals wake up and immediately engage in behaviors that actively degrade their cellular health, disrupt their neurochemistry, and accelerate biological aging. We are constantly sold the idea of a psychological morning routine featuring journaling, affirmations, or slow stretching. But clinical data reveals that human longevity is not dictated by your mindset. It is dictated by your circadian biology and the strict synchronization of your endocrine system. Today, we are stripping away the self-help fluff to analyze the precise neurological and endocrinological events that occur in the first 10 to 15 minutes of waking. We will break down exactly how you can medically optimize your morning to preserve telomere length, maximize mitochondrial density, clear out senescent cells, and theoretically add a decade of high-functioning years to your lifespan. Before we analyze the clinical data, subscribe to the MedMetrics for objective medical truth. To understand morning biology, we must first look at the cortisol awakening response, clinically referred to as CAR. Cortisol is routinely and incorrectly demonized by mainstream media as purely a stress hormone. However, in the strict context of circadian rhythm, a massive immediate spike in cortisol upon waking is not only healthy, it is biologically mandatory for human survival and optimal performance. This morning spike acts as the central firing mechanism for your immune system, your cognitive focus, and your basal metabolic rate. If your morning cortisol rise is blunt, delayed, or fragmented, you will experience a state known as sleep inertia, characterized by chronic lethargy, profound brain fog, and systemic inflammation that persists throughout the entire day. A dysfunctional cortisol awakening response is heavily correlated in the clinical literature with accelerated cellular aging and neurodegenerative diseases. So the paramount question becomes, how do we biologically trigger a maximal healthy cortisol spike in the very first 10 minutes of consciousness? The primary, non-negotiable mechanism is light, specifically High-Lux photon energy entering your eyes. Your retinas contain a highly specialized subset of neurons called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. Unlike your rods and cones, these cells do not form visual images. They exist solely as biological light meters to measure the brightness and spectral composition of your environment. When these specific ganglion cells absorb bright, natural sunlight, particularly in the blue-yellow light spectrum prevalent at dawn, they fire an immediate electrical impulse down the optic nerve directly to a region of your hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This nucleus is your brain's master biological clock. When this master clock receives the unarguable signal of natural daylight, it instantaneously executes two vital functions. It halts the production of melatonin, the hormone responsible for sleep architecture, and it signals the adrenal glands located on top of your kidneys to rapidly flood your systemic circulation with cortisol and epinephrine. This is the physiological awakening sequence. The problem modern humans face is that looking at a smartphone screen or turning on a standard indoor LED light bulb provides roughly 500 lux of light energy. From a biological perspective, this is completely insufficient to trigger the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Stepping outside into natural sunlight, even on a cloudy or overcast day, provides between 10,000 and 50,000 lux of photon energy. This massive, sudden influx of lux is the single most critical longevity behavior you can execute. By exposing your unprotected eyes to natural sunlight within the first 10 minutes of waking, you synchronize every downstream biological process, from your gut microbiome's digestive schedule to your liver's metabolic capacity, locking your body into a precise 24-hour rhythm. Furthermore, this morning light pulse acts as a biological timer. It sets a strict countdown for the release of evening melatonin roughly 14 hours later. Because melatonin is one of the most potent endogenous antioxidants in the human body, capable of crossing the blood-brain barrier to repair DNA damage during deep sleep, Your morning sunlight exposure directly dictates your brain's ability to heal itself that night. The second biological lever in this 10-minute clinical routine is core body temperature manipulation. Your entire sleep-wake cycle is inextricably linked to your internal thermometer. To successfully transition into deep, slow-wave sleep, your core body temperature must drop by roughly 1 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Conversely, to wake up, exit sleep inertia, and become highly alert, your core body temperature must rapidly rise. Most individuals intuitively take a hot shower in the morning, assuming this warms their body. This is a profound biological error. Exposing the surface of your skin to external heat triggers a physiological response known as vasodilation. The blood vessels near the surface of your skin expand, and blood rushes to your periphery to release heat into the environment, thereby lowering your internal core body temperature. This functionally signals your brain to return to a state of sleep. Conversely, acute cold exposure, such as a cold shower or an ice plunge for a duration of 1 to 3 minutes, causes severe, immediate vasoconstriction. Blood is forcefully shunted away from your extremities and driven deeply into your core to protect your vital organs from hypothermia. This rapid mechanical increase in core body temperature acts as a profound biological stimulant. Furthermore, peer-reviewed clinical data demonstrates that acute cold exposure triggers a 250% increase in baseline dopamine and a massive sustained surge in norepinephrine. This neurochemical cocktail fundamentally alters your brain's baseline focus, mood, and stress resilience for the remainder of the day, mimicking the physiological effects of clinical-grade pharmaceutical stimulants, but entirely without the subsequent chemical crash or receptor downregulation. The third critical element of this clinical morning routine involves reversing nocturnal cellular dehydration. During a standard 8-hour sleep cycle, you lose a highly significant volume of fluid through respiratory exhalation and mild cutaneous perspiration. You wake up every single day in a state of systemic dehydration. However, simply drinking a large glass of plain, unmineralized water is physiologically inefficient and can actually be counterproductive. Your cells do not absorb water via osmosis alone. They rely heavily on an electrochemical gradient driven by the sodium-potassium pump embedded in the cellular membrane. When you drink plain water on an empty stomach, you risk further diluting your blood plasma sodium levels, a state known as mild hyponatremia. To optimize cellular hydration rapidly and efficiently, you must introduce electrolytes. Dissolving a half teaspoon of high-quality sodium chloride alongside trace minerals like magnesium and potassium into your morning water creates an isotonic solution. This precise chemical composition allows the fluid to be rapidly drawn across the cellular membrane, immediately restoring blood volume, stabilizing your blood pressure, and providing your central and peripheral nervous systems with the conductive ions strictly necessary to transmit electrical impulses at maximal speed. Without sufficient sodium, your neurons literally misfire, leading to physical lethargy and cognitive delay. Finally, we must urgently address the widespread biological mistake of immediate morning caffeine consumption. Adenosine is an inhibitory neurotransmitter that steadily accumulates in your brain throughout your waking hours, binding to specific receptors to create sleep pressure. While you sleep, your brain works to clear this accumulated adenosine. However, when you first wake up, a small but significant amount of residual adenosine remains bound to your neural receptors. Caffeine functions pharmacologically as an adenosine antagonist. It forcefully binds to these receptors, preventing the adenosine from signaling fatigue to your brain. If you consume caffeine within the first 10 minutes of waking, you effectively trap that residual morning adenosine in your system. By mid-afternoon, when the caffeine metabolizes, detaches, and is cleared by your liver, that trapped adenosine floods your brain all at once, resulting in a severe, unavoidable energetic crash. To align with your neurobiology and prevent this collapse, You must absolutely delay your caffeine intake for a minimum of 90 to 120 minutes after waking. This critical window allows your natural cortisol spike and your natural sunlight exposure to clear the remaining adenosine organically. When you finally introduce caffeine later in the morning, it binds to entirely clean receptors, providing a smooth, sustained, and highly efficient elevation in energy that will carry you through the entire day. To summarize this clinical protocol, within the first 10 minutes of waking, you bypass your smartphone entirely to prevent low-lux artificial dopamine spikes. You immediately step outside to expose your retinal ganglion cells to high-lux natural sunlight, forcefully triggering the suprachiasmatic nucleus and setting your circadian clock. You introduce a high-mineral, sodium-dense hydration solution to reactivate your cellular sodium-potassium pumps and restore conductive blood volume. You forcefully manipulate your core body temperature upward through acute cold exposure to trigger systemic vasoconstriction and massive dopamine release. And you strictly delay caffeine consumption to allow for total organic biological adenosine clearance. This sequence requires absolutely zero financial investment and demands a mere 10 minutes of your morning, yet it profoundly alters your autonomic nervous system, regulates your endocrine profile, and protects your entire cellular matrix from accelerated degradation. Human longevity and peak biological performance are not achieved through random acts of wellness or aesthetic morning routines. They are achieved through the disciplined, unapologetic, daily alignment of your actions with your fundamental evolutionary biology. Stop guessing with your endocrine system. Execute the protocol. Subscribe to the MedMetrics and take absolute command of your physiological trajectory today.